Welcome to EPG Pathshala lecture series in architecture for MArch students. Today we will be seeing on lighting of public spaces under the subject urban landscape design. The objectives of today's lecture is on public lighting, which will be aiming mainly on pedestrian areas, lighting design principles, categories of light fixtures and landscape lighting effects. Lighting of public space. We know that normally in daytime the natural light, it facilitates a safe, comfortable, efficient and enjoyable walking experience. The image that it shows here, it is a nighttime image. You can all visualize how this image would be or this place would be without these artificial lighting. It is totally dark, deserted area, but only with the provision of artificial lighting it is much more a better walking space. So, as a saying, anyone who is out and about in the dark knows how vital lighting is. So, during the darkness, artificial lighting techniques should light the environment for the particular needs and preferences of pedestrians to maintain that standard of walking experience. Public lighting for pedestrian areas. Effective public lighting, which optimizes the usable lighting that has to be provided. Usable lighting is nothing but that is the light between the range of light spectrum between the ultraviolet ray and the infrared rays. So, that visible light which is within the color spectrum that is visible to the human eye, it relates to the pedestrian behavior that are intended and decide for any area or for the route. So, it is the nature of those pedestrian activities and locations that should drive determination of the appropriate size, location and intensity of the lighting. So, based on specific area for which lighting has to be put on, you have to decide out what kind of lighting system has to be put on, what size, where it has to be located, at what distance, what is the distribution of light it has to be. So, that has to be decided for any pedestrian area. So, this image it shows one on the top left, which is a normal lighting system during the evenings, where you have at equidistance lighting fixture is being placed and there are lots of pedestrian movement all around. But during the night, suppose say if one set of lights been switched off alternatively, then the lots of dark spots been created. So, which creates lots of crime and vandalism in such areas. So, instead you can actually dim the light spots or the luminous systems, so that you get a very distributed lighting system all around and you can avoid lots of vandalism or crime in that area. So, that you can also avoid lots of energy losses. Now, we are going to see about pedestrian lighting. Pedestrian lighting is nothing but the lighting that is being kept on the open spaces or on the outdoor areas, where lots of user groups who would mainly be as pedestrians. Lights which illuminate pedestrians or pedestrian facilities is called as pedestrian lighting. So, there are three types of lighting systems. One is primary, second is supplementary and third is decorative. Primary, it takes care of all the lighting that has been put on the outdoor areas. Mainly it is for wayfinding and also to lessen the for all the safety issues, to lessen the hazards. We have all the primary lighting systems. Second is supplementary. Supplementary is part of the larger lighting system, so that to highlight any specific area, specific task, these supplementary lighting is being useful. The third is decorative. Decorative is mainly for the aesthetic purpose. Suppose if we need to highlight any sculpture or say a fountain, then such decorative lightings have been used. So, these are some examples or images of three different types of lighting. The last corner is the decorative kind of lighting, where lots of shadows been created on the pathways. So, it is more of aesthetic nature, and one on the top, it is mostly of like supplementary lighting, where you have all the lighting features, but to highlight a specific task, then such supplementary lighting has been used. And this is the primary lighting. Primary is used for wayfinding and also to reduce the hazards when you move on. Now, public lighting in pedestrian areas. There are three main factors in which public lighting in pedestrian areas can be controlled. The first is the angle, that is the angle between the object and the viewer. Second is the distance between the object and the viewer. Third is the size of the light source. So, how big the light source or the light fixture have to be. So, the first, the angle between the light source and the viewer. Lighting is generally off axis. This is normally it is like in even in natural light, sun is not always on top of the head of a user. So, it is normally off axis, the natural light. So, similarly even the artificial light that we create need not be on the top of head, meaning it need not be on the on axis, it is normally off axis. So, this off axis lighting or the presence of an angle between the incident light and the viewing direction, it helps the viewer define the three dimensionality of the viewed scene. That is, when there is an angle that has been created between the angle of incident light and the viewer, then you see the 3D effect of the object. For example, this image, you could see this is the on axis image where the angle of the incident light and the viewpoint is the same. But whereas this image, it is the same kind of an image where the angle of viewpoint is in one direction and the incident light is in another direction, where an angle has been created, then there is a light and a shadow that has been created. So, you see a very well lit object which gets to know about the form and the 3D image or the quality of the object. So, this is called as off axis lighting. Second is the distance between the light source and the lit subject. Now, this is the light source and this is the object which is supposed to be lit, and this distance x is the distance between the light source and the object. Now, if we start to vary the light distances, that is the object, the distance that has been placed between the source and the object, then the luminance is said to be inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the light source. So, when you keep moving the object, it keeps inversely proportionately decreasing. So, in the point B, it is only 1/4 the illuminance that has been got, whereas in point C it is only 1/9. So, when the distance keeps moving, the light source, the intensity of the light is also reducing. The third is the size of the light source. This is primarily based on how much or how big the light source is. So, a subject lit by a small light source has a narrow or abrupt transition zone. So, the lighting is termed as a hard light source. The image on the top, this is a very small light source. So, you see the transition between the lit surface and the shadowed area is very little. So, it is called as narrow transition zone, whereas in larger light source the transition zone is more. So, it is called as softer light source and the transition is wider. So, the subject lit by a large light source has a broad transition zone. So, the lighting is termed as soft light source. Now, we are going to talk about colored lighting. Colored lighting is primarily used in areas where you want to highlight a object, where you are supposed to lit the surface. First, under color lighting is the color appearance. It refers to the apparent color of the eminent light, that is the actual color which is evident because of the light source. The color appearance of lighting can be selected to particularly complement the scene being lit to create prestigious and attractive effects. So, this image is showing a white light which has been put on the roads. So, the effect is so evident that the white it shows the natural color rendering of the space. The second point under color lighting is the color rendering. Based on the light, the quality of light and the color of the light, the effects can be rendered. It refers to the effect that lighting has on the colors of the object that it illuminates. This image is a contrast between the white light source and the colored light source. One on the right, it shows the orange light source, which is like a sodium vapor lamp which has been put on the streets. It gives a very orangish effect on the foliage, on the roads, on the pavement and the objects which has been placed on that surface, whereas the white light, it is more of the natural color that you can see even as you see like a daylight appearance. The third is on the nuisance of light, like how all we can lit the surface and what quality that it will give, and what is that we are supposed to avoid, so that there is some nuisance that has been created because of lighting the surface. So, nuisance of light can be given through misdirection of illumination, creating glare or spill light. Normally glare is also called as nuisance of light because that is the light which we cannot see in our normal vision. Similarly, spill light is the target area which is supposed to be lit, and we also cover the other area which is not supposed to be lit, that is called as spill light. Inappropriate lighting is also called as nuisance of light because it is inappropriate in that particular place. Sometimes even over lighting or sometimes under lighting can also become nuisance in lighting. So, this image, it shows the target area in which the axis is being targeted for lighting. So, this is the central axis of illumination. So, the target area is more and there is less of spill light. So, this is considered to be the normal lighting system, but whereas this image, it shows more of spillover light than the target area. So, this is called as nuisance of light. Now, as I said, glare occurs when light is seen as too bright, which is relative to the ambient brightness that the viewer has adapted to. Example, when the pedestrian moves rapidly between an area of low luminance and an area of high luminance. This we normally see even in most of the underground parking areas, where we immediately step out from the parking areas from the underground. We tend to get this nuisance of light, which is a glare, because from a very darker spots, when you step out into a very bright light, then you get glare. So, that is also nuisance of light. So, when we design for lighting systems, we have to take care of that. Then spill light, it occurs where illumination is provided outside the target area. So, illumination can also spill upwards. Sometimes it need not be on the ground, it can be projecting onwards. Suppose if you are illuminating a tree branch, then it is an upward lighting. Then the spill light need not be on to the feature, it can be away from the feature. So, it will lit the sky. So, that is called as sky glow. That is one of the nuisance of light. Next is the objectives of outdoor lighting: improving the legibility of the critical nodes, landmarks, circulations and activity zones in landscape. So, where all we need outdoor lighting, where all people move, where all people gather, where all people concentrate, and also to differentiate between the paths that they take. If there is a junction and they wanted to decide on which path are they going to take, then at critical nodes, and also to highlight landmarks, because landmarks are the deciding factors of the locations, and mostly the circulation points in the pathways to decide on which the pedestrians to take, where not they have to go. So, for all this the lighting is required. Then safe movement of pedestrians, then reveal salient features of site at a desired intensity of light. Now, we are going to talk about the design principles in outdoor lighting. The first is orientation. So, how exactly the lighting system have to be oriented. The first is the hierarchy of lighting, because there are various lighting fixtures, lighting distribution patterns that has been available. So, at what height it has to be kept and what distance it has to be kept. So, that is the lighting hierarchy. Major and minor roads and paths are differentiated with this hierarchy system. So, it is done by varying height, spacing, color of lamps, distribution and the brightness of the light. So, the image that shows here, it differentiates the major road towards the minor road, and also the smaller pathways. Need not be straight pathways, it can be even meandering pathways, but based on the light positions, the distribution and the interval where it is being placed, the patterns are being created. So, this is called as lighting hierarchy. The next is clear lighting patterns under the orientation. So, staggered lighting or staggered layout of roads and pathway lighting, it tends to obscure rather than reinforce the direction of circulation and location of intersections. This image, it gives a very clear image of how the lighting patterns have to be. For example, where the vehicular movement is more, like roadways, there you have a very taller lamp fixtures, so that you lit the surface. Where it is only pedestrian usage, then it can be of smaller lighting fixture where you only highlight that particular point. So, there is a very distinctive lighting pattern that has been created. The next is intersection of articulation, that is how to identify route areas, then arrival points, and how to differentiate between the nodal points. So, intersection articulation, the first is how to differentiate the decision points, crossings, arrival points. The presence, shape and nature of lighting will help you to determine the intersections. For example, this image, one on the left shows the undesirable lighting pattern because it is a very meandering pathway, and if you have lighting all over on either sides of the pathway, then it is very disturbing for the humans to move on. But whereas if it is on one side, then it is very clear to identify the path because it is already meandering. So, it is easy for one to make or to identify how the path could be. So, this is a very desirable lighting system when compared to alternative system. So, that is under the placement of luminous, that is based on the spacing height and the distribution pattern of how the lighting system can be kept. And the third is the deciding what to light. This is much more important to decide on because normally when we light all the areas which is very undesirable, but we have to specify what area to be lit and which area not to be lit. So, this slide which shows about the luminous mounting heights. For example, the image on the top, it shows the area where lots of vehicular movements are there like roadways. So, it is a very tall mounting structure of light, and the light that is being distributed on the other side where there is lots of foliage from the trees. So, you create a lots of shadow effect, and when there is a pedestrian movement that is happening on the other side where you see lots of shadow which has been cast on. So, you have to introduce one more light fixture here and still there is lots of shadows that has been created. So, which is again undesirable. So, if you start decreasing the mounting heights of the lights, then the image on the bottom, it shows a very desirable lighting system based on the mounting heights. So, that you get lots of lit surface, and because of the foliage of the trees it is not getting disturbed. In this image, it talks about what to light and what not to light. For example, if there is a say a dustbin or some awkward structure which you are not supposed to lit, but there is a nice ornamental plant that has been kept. So, suppose if the light source is from this side and you are highlighting only the tree, but still the other features which is awkward in nature is also getting highlighted. So, for that you could do like this. There are lots of sunken lighting systems with louvers. So, you can highlight only the required feature. It could be a statue, it could be a sculpture, or it could be even a tree that you wanted to highlight, so that you can avoid lots of these undesirable areas. Okay. So, you have to decide on what to light and what not to light. And the third is the safety. Safety is the most important factor that we have to consider in outdoor areas, mostly in pedestrian areas. So, for safety factors, first foremost thing we have to see is the glare. Suppose if there is lots of glare in the outdoor area, then of course, people will get blind at that particular point, then the safety measure goes off. Glare is nothing but the visual discomfort that we get in any outdoor area is called as glare. So, it can be altered by luminous location, mounting height, fixture type and lamp intensity. So, these should be carefully selected to optimize the light distribution, and we can avoid or minimize glare. So, this image shows in a light fixture of this is the area or the angle in which the light is being distributed. Suppose if it moves on to the other side, so this zone is called as the zone of glare. Suppose if a person is standing and his high level matches to this zone of glare, then it is a visual discomfort. So, to alter that in your fixture, so the zone of glare can be avoided, and you can have lots of these projections to avoid that zone of glare. The next is underlighting. Even if you have less of lighting, which is inappropriate lighting, then even that is also a safety issue. So, less lighting is hazardous to protect pedestrians and public open spaces. So, these are certain images of how glare and underlighting can create lots of safety problems. So, this image on the left shows glare. This is actually a walkway, and you see it is in two different levels. So, one on the upper level you have a bollard lighting. So, for a person walking in the upper level, it is not under glare, but suppose if a person walking in the lower level, this actually matches with the eye level of the human. So, this creates a glare, and from a person viewing from this point to the other point, for him it is only a dark spot that he will see on this side, because it is like a blind spot that he creates because of the glare. And the second image, this is again a walkway, but the lighting is focused in such a way that it the person who is walking on the walkway, and again it creates glare. It can be altered by lowering such system, so that you can alter so that only the space which has to be lit can be lowered, the other areas can be directed towards the lit space. Then the third image is again talking about glare, but here normally light fittings are oriented towards the necessity or the need of the people. Suppose if they are walking on the walkways, then such bollard lightings or smaller low level lightings can work on. But in case if there is a seating provision that has been given, or sometimes even humans tend to sit on wherever there is possible provisions been made, then in such cases it is like a glare for them. So, that is also to be avoided on. The fourth is on security. So, how exactly lighting systems can improve your security systems in the outdoor areas. So, primarily we have to concentrate on walkway lightings. So, enough peripheral distribution to immediate surroundings. For example, this image on the left, it shows lots of lit areas because of the tall mounting structure. So, this is called as peripheral lighting. So, all along the periphery there is enough of light source from one point source. And the second is vertical distribution over the walkway areas. So, if there are two lighting poles, then the light which overlaps, okay, that creates a diffused light in the center. So, this is called as vertical light distribution, and this is primarily used in most of the pedestrian areas where it is primarily used for walkways. The next is on atmosphere and character. So, how exactly the atmosphere changes based on the lighting system, and how does each space differentiate accordingly to the lighting system. So, how is the character of the space changes. The first is what we are going to see is the background of the space. Exterior spaces should have a well defined sense of background. For example, this image, suppose if the space has been left, there is supposed to be some walkway. So, and this is a building. Suppose if the space is lit, because the walkway has to be lit, so it is lit like this, but the other side of the walkway, that is the background, is not lit. So, this becomes like a hiding pocket for vandalism or for crime. So, this is considered to be the undesirable lighting system, whereas for desirable it has to be the other way around, so that the pathway is also lit and the background is also lit, or at least as a small diffused light can be put on, so that the background is also known. So, this is a desirable system of lighting. So, it should be accommodated with peripheral lighting from the walkways, signage, entrances and other elements which is relevant to the definition of space, so that we know what the background is, what is happening on the other side of the pathway. The next is the foreground. So, once we know what the background space is, suppose when we are walking in a pathway, what is happening on either sides of the pathway, that is the background. Now, the foreground is, the foreground spaces should utilize local lighting which produces maximum focus, minimum distraction and no glare, because foreground is what the actual space that you are walking on. So, it should not have glare. So, we should know what is happening before us. So, if there is a glare, then there is a point of blind spot that has been created. Next is surveillance, light backgrounds and highlight the entrances. So, where you are supposed to lit the surface, you are supposed to lit it properly, and what not to light, you are not supposed to light. Next is to avoid vandalism. Of course, proper lighting of foreground and background is required. Next is on illumination of objects. This has mainly been done to accentuate the shape, that is the form of the object. Suppose if you are lighting the outdoor space, then if you have to highlight say in a statue or a sculpture in a park that has to be highlighted, then what kind of a lighting system will enable to accentuate the shape of the structure. The ability to perceive volumetric form is influenced by the gradient of light and shadow falling on the object. So, with the help of light source only, the object is determined to have its volumetric form. The form is identified only with the light source. Suppose if it is all around lighting, that is uniform lighting, like this, the image on the top right, it shows uniform lighting where it has been lit from all sides. It is called as uniformly distributed light source. Then there is not much of shadow that has been created, because from everywhere there is lots of light. Then you will not understand what the form or shape of that object is. But whereas if the light source is only from one point, which is called a single point source, then you create lots of shadows. Again in this area, because of lots of shadows, you will miss upon lots of details, because there is lots of shadowed area and less of lit area. So, you will miss out lots of details of the object. Even this is also not desirable. So, there is a combination of your uniform distribution light and also one point source light. So, when there is combination of such lighting, then you come to know what the form is, the volume of the form, and you also get to know lots of details of the form. So, this is considered to be desirable. So, one source should accentuate the shape and form by contrasting the surface with sharp shadows, while the other source, that is the second source, which provides fill light for the details. So, this is called as combination lighting. The next criteria is on color perception, that is differences in lamp light color are often used with great effect in public lighting to color code roadways or to clearly delineate one area from the other. To improve the perception of outdoor environment, where the color contrast of paving and landscape material is often subtle. For example, in color codes, suppose as I showed you in a previous image of where if you have sodium vapor lamps, then the whole area is more of orange tint in color, even the foliage of the trees, the objects that has been placed on the street will look more of orangish in nature. But whereas if you use lots of white color, then accordingly the color changes. Suppose if you have to dramatize the space, then you can use lots of color techniques and you can accentuate that space with lots of such colors. That is called as color perception. So, we are going to end this session. So, we will see the summary of this module. We had seen on public lighting primarily for the pedestrian areas. So, what all to light, what not to light, and within this session we also saw the types of public lighting, how the fixtures have to be placed, the factors for public lighting, and the solutions for desirable and undesirable lighting. We also saw public lighting in of the principles for public lighting design, the lighting patterns, mounting heights, fixtures, underlighting, and how to avoid glare. So, with this I conclude this session. Thank you.